All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. So I got a very interesting question about Arnold Schwarzenegger. So the question was, if Arnold competed today, how do you think he would do, and how do you think he would look? So that question is not referring to whether or not Arnold could make a comeback today, but if Arnold were in his prime right now in 2017 versus in his prime back in the 1970s, would he have been as iconic and legendary as he was back then, given all the things today that are involved in bodybuilding and the standard of bodybuilding that has been set thus far? So in my opinion, I think Arnold Schwarzenegger came along at the perfect point in time. So back in the 70s when he was in his prime and he was winning all his Olympias, I think that was the highest point for Arnold Schwarzenegger, because that was, a lot of people know that as the golden era of bodybuilding. That was a time when, aesthetics and lines and conditioning and symmetry, those were all the key focal points of bodybuilding, and being a big mass monster wasn't the focus at all. So in the 70s, aesthetics was key, and today it seems like muscle is key. Just sheer muscle mass is what everybody's going for. Everyone wants to be the biggest, everyone wants to be the freakiest, and everyone wants to be the most muscular. So the two key factors to consider if you're talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger competing today would probably be, number one, the drug use and the amount of drugs used, and number two, the judging criteria in bodybuilding. So today, like I said, the judging criteria is much, much different than it was back in the day. For example, you have Heath, who is the current Mr. Olympia, who weighs 250 pounds on stage, and he is 3 inches shorter than Arnold. And at Arnold's biggest, he weighed between 245 and 250 on stage at his biggest and at his best. So compared to Heath, he is 3 inches taller. So obviously the standards have changed, and there's a lot heavier bodybuilders today. So Arnold, being over 6 foot tall, had he competed today, he would probably be close to 300 pounds on stage. A comparable bodybuilder today would probably be Dennis Wolf. In his prime, I know he's injured now, but in his prime, he was 5'11", and he was about 260 to 270 pounds on stage. In the off season, he would be 280 plus. And again, Dennis Wolf is still a couple of inches shorter than Arnold Schwarzenegger was in his prime. So again, for Arnold Schwarzenegger to have been competitive with today's crop of bodybuilders, he would have had to put on a large amount of muscle, probably somewhere between 30 and 40 pounds heavier than he competed at back in the day. So I think in pumping iron, he only weighed about 230 on stage, maybe mid 230s. So definitely 30 to 40 pounds of muscle he would have had to put on. And to do that, he would have had to experiment with the drugs. So the judging criteria and the whole drug use today both play into each other, because now the criteria is to be bigger and more muscular. And to do that, it's going to require more drug use and more diverse use of different drugs. Now, nobody can say for sure what steroids Arnold Schwarzenegger took back in the 70s except for Arnold himself. But what we do know is they did have test, they did have dianabol, they did have decadurabolin, and they did have primobolan. And GH was around in the 1970s. A lot of people think that GH is kind of like a more recent thing, but in the 1970s, it was very limited. The availability was very limited, and the price was very, very high. So in all likelihood, bodybuilders were not using massive doses of it, if they were even using it at all. So it was around, but it wasn't really prominently used yet in the 1970s. Not really till after 1986 was it prominently used. But we do know they weren't abusing insulin, and we do know they weren't abusing site enhancement oil like synthol like they are today. So we do know those two things were not factors in the physiques. So my honest opinion on if Arnold competed today, I think obviously it shows that Arnold was very hungry back in the 70s. He was very determined and dedicated to do whatever it would take to win those Olympias and to be a champion. So I think he would do the same thing and apply the same mentality to bodybuilding today. So as a result, he probably would have went crazy on the drugs. He probably would have done as many drugs as he thought was necessary to win, and as a result, probably grown a much bigger, much more muscular physique, and sacrificing aesthetics in doing so. So I think had Arnold Schwarzenegger been born at a time where he would have competed in recent years instead of the 70s, Arnold Schwarzenegger would have been nowhere near as iconic as he was, because I think he just came around at the perfect time. His physique was perfect for that era. It was perfect for the movie roles that kind of launched him into this massive, super famous person that he is now. So I think he was better off in the 1970s. I mean, would you guys really want to see an Arnold Schwarzenegger today, even though he was bigger and more muscular, that couldn't hit a vacuum pose, or that didn't have a nice V-taper, or didn't have a small waist, And what if we had an Arnold Schwarzenegger that had a roid gut, had some Palumboism? I mean, could you guys imagine how disappointing that would be to see? I mean, his genetics were probably some of the best genetics of all time, and that brings into consideration, what if Arnold competed in classic physique today? Now, obviously, he would do very, very well in classic physique, but we're talking about men's open bodybuilding. If Arnold Schwarzenegger were trying to win the Olympia today in 2017, do I think he could win it? I'm actually going to say yes. I think he could win it with his genetics if he competed in the Olympia today, and took more doses of steroids, had a little bit more muscle mass. But I think he would have sacrificed a lot of his classic aesthetics, and he wouldn't have looked like the Arnold that we remember. But I do think with his genetics, he probably could have won an Olympia and certainly been a top 6 threat today. Granted, he was taking all the things that the guys are taking today, so he could catch up with them. So that's my opinion on the situation. Let me know what you guys think. If Arnold were competing today, how would he look? Or do you think he was better off competing in the 1970s? Please give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.